Reginald Max. He's the originations leader, development and investment for GE Africa. Reginald, you were telling us that you see basically everything that comes to GE in terms of projects on the continent. And from your shoes, give us some perspectives on your experiences of working with financiers and partners on the project development side, and give us some war stories of what you've appreciated and what has been some of the things that you'd like to see differently done.
Maybe I should start by saying GE is not a donor, neither is it a DFI. So I think my perspective is slightly different in that we have a relatively selfish kind of attitude to project development. Obviously, we're doing it for the purposes of creating our footprint in Africa. So GE traditionally was an OEM. We supplied equipment. And I think we realized over time that we needed to pivot and start looking at the project development aspect, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, as a way of doing two things. I think firstly, to support governments in their ability and in their understanding of how project development works. And secondly, to also increase our footprint. What's key in my mind is one of bankability. And I think, it was mentioned by James earlier that the whole development process, project development process, is really to identify project bankability and how one achieves that. So one may look at it from an early phase perspective, and let me tell you what I mean. You talk to different developers who will tell you, we come at an early stage and this is what we want to do. So the minute you start conceptualizing a project, we want to be part of it. Some will say, we'll come in at the pre-PPA project phase, and I'm talking here to power. So just before you sign the PPA, we'll come on board and we'll support you with whatever resources are required to be able to make it happen. And in some cases, some don't even come until after the PPA. So you'll find in the whole project development arena, what we've discovered as GE is that there's lots of dependencies, and the dependencies are around regulatory framework, around technology mix, around access to gas. And I say that with Nigeria in mind, in that when one looks at developing a project today in Nigeria, especially power, one's got to understand where the gas is coming from and where the transmission will be to evacuate the power once you've developed it. So you're not just looking at the project in isolation. You've got to look at the full value chain of infrastructure and what it means to be able to take it forward. So we spend a lot of time advocating and talking to national governments to make them understand that the power sector, for example, is about feedstock, identifying where gas is and putting the pipelines in place, generating it, and then evacuating it. And going back 10, 15 years, the Nigerian government put up, I think, something like 5,000 megawatts, which today is still stranded because there's no gas. Now, it doesn't happen anywhere else, but it did happen. And even if they did find the gas, they wouldn't be able to evacuate it because there's no transmission for such capacity. So again, herein lies the big issue for us as GE is not just looking at project development in ensuring that projects get to bankability, but making people understand the full value chain of that infrastructure play going forward. So, and again, I think going back to what I do, so at least I just explained that when someone said I onboard projects, my responsibility at GE is to look at every single project that is brought by our customers or by potential developers who are looking to put together power, transportation, rail, or whatever it is that GE has a vested interest in. We assess that almost like venture capitalists, and we determine bankability. And that determination is primarily around 7 or 8 different principles, and you may have 1 to 4 and may not have 5 to 7. Or you may have 1 to 3 and you may have 7 but not have 5 to 6. And we then make a determination whether we believe that it's bankable and it's feasible. But we've taken a slightly different perspective to this in that we realize that looking at projects in isolation doesn't solve the problem. And let me explain. I'll use Eskom in South Africa as an example. And then I'll extrapolate that to other utilities and other agencies with a similar mandate in different countries, is that we know that Eskom needs to deliver another 10 gig into the network over the next 10, 15 years. We know that. So our play is let's partner for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So we're no longer partnering on a project-by-project basis, but rather looking at the full value chain and saying we're part of the process over the 20-year period, and we'll inject capital year on year to ensure that as you roll out your build program and as you develop the project, we're part of the process to make it happen. What it does, it allows you to have a consistent approach to project development. It obviously allows you to buy GE equipment, which is great for us. But principally what it does, it then allows and provides a consistent approach to infrastructure development, not project development as such, because we then look at the full value chain and what it means to invest in the different components of it. And we invest in that process, and obviously over the next 15, 20 years, we benefit from it. But then it becomes a win-win situation. Because the minute you start looking at a project in isolation, you're hamstrung by regulatory frameworks, hamstrung by multiple funders asking for different covenants in the agreements and so forth and so on. So that's really what I'm looking at. So my call to action would be to the DFIs and to other developers that let's look at a long-term play. Let's identify agencies in sub-Saharan Africa who have a long-term mandate to deliver. We know it will happen. It has to happen. If you look at Nigeria, for example, they have a particularly serious energy situation, but we are aware of the fact that in the next 15, 20 years, they're going to put something on the grid. They're going to have to develop. So let's be part of that process and let's make sure that it works. So we then develop teams that understand different parts of that value chain, so we allow the national governments and the agencies to be able to do that. And we say that, again, if you look at sub-Saharan Africa today, it's depressed prices, volatility, exchange rate issues, no foreign currency. So you find that you have to ask yourself, do you stop until they get back on track? So do we wait until Angola gets back on track? Do we wait until oil prices are back up again and the commodity price boom starts kicking in? And the answer is no. The answer is it's a long-term solution. And that's really where what we see, and our philosophy is really just driving that relationship to ensure that we meet those objectives. And where we interface with DFIs and other players who come in as co-developers on specific parts of that value chain, we're happy to interact to ensure that we meet the objective of delivering on the ground.
Great. Thanks, Reg.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.